Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Haas Talks Foss. I'm here today to talk about MyRocks and, RocksDB with Vamsi from Quora. How are you today, Vamsi?
Good. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes. So, Vamsi, I saw this blog post you did and was very intrigued by it. I know Vadim sent it over to me and said, wow, you should really have Vamsi on the podcast to talk about his journey to using RocksDB because it was so interesting. And I read through the blog and came up with some some interesting questions, some things. But I figured it'd be a good place to maybe just tell everybody a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. So I am Vamsi. I joined Quora maybe 2.5 years ago, like around December 2018. And I'm an engineer in the core infrastructure team at Quora. So my focus has been more on databases, but the team itself deals with databases, caches, content delivery networks, monitoring, bunch of other stuff. So and before Quora, I have been working at Pinterest, Facebook, and so on. But I've been doing similar stuff like databases stuff all along. So that's about
Okay,
it.
so databases at scale, because all of those are fairly large infrastructures,
Yes,
right?
sure.
So tell me, maybe just give us a little bit of idea on Quora's infrastructure. How big is it in general?
Yeah, so Quora has more than 300 million monthly active users. So and
Okay.
I think um, we are a much smaller company in terms of number of employees. So less than 300 employees. So I think from that perspective, that is a lot of opportunity for impact, like for anyone who is working at Quora. So yep, and
And
go
go
ahead.
ahead. So,
Um,
and Quora does kind of question and answers, right? For those
right.
who aren't familiar with the business.
Right. So
Okay.
the mission
And so
of
you have
Quora
three.
is
Okay.
the mission of Quora is to share and grow the world's knowledge. So at the heart of Quora is questions, because the question and answer is a very good format for sharing knowledge, right? So Quora is trying to connect people who have the knowledge and people who need the knowledge, and also to bring together people with different perspectives. And so in the last few years, Quora has also launched spaces and subscriptions, which basically allow people to also make some money from the knowledge that they are sharing. So
Oh, okay. And I saw that your stack in it had quite diverse. You had MySQL, you had HBase, Redis, Memcache, a little bit of everything, it seemed.
yes, so it has grown over time, and so we initially started off with MySQL. So the users' questions, answers, they were being stored in MySQL. But at that time, we had not implemented sharding in MySQL. So we brought in HBase mainly for say generated data. You might be having offline jobs which generate some data, but then you may need to access that data with very low latency from the web, the product. So for those cases, we brought in HBase because those data sets could be large, and also HBase provides some of these features like time to live and so on. So if you want to get rid of data, automatically, if it is not updated in the last week or last month or so, so HBase provides those features, and so we brought in HBase. And of course, caching is something that everyone needs to do to reduce the load on their databases. So we use Memcache, and then Redis cache is being used mainly for the data structures that it provides, right? If you want to cache lists
Okay.
or these other data structures, that's when the Redis cache becomes attractive. So I hope that answers some of these questions about why we
Okay.
are using all these. Yeah.
And so your background is, kind of across all of these, but you have used quite a bit of MySQL, correct?
Sure. Sure.
And so when you're managing like a MySQL or a relational database at scale, what are some of the tools that you've used?
Yes. So, like often people need to at some point build some form of sharding. So that's I would say that becomes necessary at some point. Then besides that, the usual, the backups, and then the MySQL replication. So those things are needed definitely. And Yeah, so here at Quora now we built internally some tools to allow us to monitor like what queries are running on MySQL and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. So you've built a lot of your own scripts and infrastructure to support the environment because your environment has real specific nuances and differences. And
Sure.
I'm curious, so you've got this big environment, you're managing it, and so there's a decision point to try and move away from HBase. So you brought it in at some point in the history of Quora. Someone brought it in, and now you're looking to remove it. What was kind of the driving factor to consider moving away from HBase?
Yeah, so the read performance, was one of the problems. So the machine learning related use case Alchemy, about which we wrote a different blog post as well. So they were complaining about the performance issues, the read latencies and stuff. So that was one thing. Then the another thing was we were using both MySQL and HBase. Both of these are very complex and very different from each other. So practically speaking, there is no knowledge or tools sharing that can happen between these two. So like nobody ever wrote a tool that works for both MySQL and HBase, right? So yeah, so that was double the complexity when we hire a new engineer, or even if we hire experienced engineer, they may not be familiar with both MySQL and HBase. So yeah, these were the two main reasons, like the read performance, especially the P99 performance, read performance, and the fact that MySQL and HBase are so different and both are complex. Yeah.
And you mentioned P99, and that's something that a lot of us in the database space are familiar. Some of our listeners might not be. Maybe tell us in your words, the importance of what that P99 is, and just so listeners understand, when we talk about P99, what we're talking about is the latency that 99% of the queries come back as. So you kind of
Yeah.
throw out the 1% outlier, and you look at that 99. So why is that important to a company like Quora?
Yeah, so one reason is that often application may needs to the product may needs to make multiple database requests. They may need to retrieve multiple data items from the database. So yeah, so the P99, the if the P99 is slow, we may be thinking that, oh, okay, only 1% requests are slow, but from the application perspective, it might be much larger than 1% because they are making multiple requests and they're trying to retrieve multiple data items, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is um, we have to remember that there are different users, and sometimes these power users, and they might be running into these P99 latency issues, and they are also very important users for us, right? So we don't want to be making them unhappy. So that's another reason. Those are like the two sides. Yeah.
So you really want consistency across your queries so people can understand that they're going to get the same user experience when they're accessing the application. There's not surprises, but you can also make some predictions on when you might need to add hardware, when you might need to change configuration, when you might need to tune. So, having the consistency really does matter, doesn't it?
You mean consistency of performance?
Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Predictability,
Yeah.
maybe it might be a better word.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
because
yes,
I think that
certainly predictability and consistency of performance also matters. Sure, yeah.
because I know that there's nothing worse than having a user, let alone a power user, who is all of a sudden like, I normally run this in a minute, and now it's taking 10 minutes.
Right,
And
right.
those are just, those are so hard to deal with.
Sure.
So you're looking at this move to try and improve your read performance. And you mentioned that the data set in HBase is quite large. That was one of the reasons for originally moving to HBase. You ended up choosing MyRocks in the MySQL solution. Did you evaluate other solutions when you were looking at this?
So we have been seeing RocksDB become very popular in the industry, right? So Facebook has adopted RocksDB, Pinterest has adopted RocksDB, Instagram has adopted RocksDB in different forms. So the question was not like whether or not to use RocksDB, but it was more like, okay, which RocksDB based system to use, right?
Ah, okay.
So and yeah, in that no, yeah, we had multiple choices, uh, but as I mentioned earlier, no, we have like MySQL and HBase, which are two very different systems, and so we wanted to avoid again bringing something that's very different from MySQL. So from that perspective, MyRocks seemed attractive because a lot of the tools and that we have built, no, tools and also the internal knowledge and expertise. Hopefully, there can be meaningful sharing of that with MyRocks. But if we use, let's say, Roxandra, for example, then we don't have any internal Cassandra knowledge or experience. So if we use Roxandra, then we need to build that expertise, right? So just to give an example. So from that
Yeah.
perspective, MyRocks seemed attractive. Yeah.
And that's, I've seen that over and over again with a lot of folks at different companies, where they can do a lot of what they need to do with multiple tools. So they choose the one they've got the most expertise or the best chance of success with. Try and consolidate there, because a lot of databases nowadays, they handle data differently, and there's different use cases for them, but there's a lot of overlapping use cases. And if you fall in one of those overlapping, it's less about the technology and more about, how comfortable you are and how quickly you can deploy and be successful with it, in my opinion. I don't know if that's your experience. It kind of sounds like it is.
Yes,
Um,
definitely. Yep.
you know, okay. And so you have MySQL running, and now you're going to start adding the MyRocks portion to it. From the MySQL perspective, is that's a completely different workload? And are you using InnoDB there, or are you also looking at MyRocks for that workload?
So we have separate MySQL instances using InnoDB and RocksDB. So there are some MySQL machines
Oh,
which
okay.
have InnoDB tables, and then there is a different set of MyRocks machines which are using RocksDB tables. So within the
Oh,
same
okay.
within the same MySQL instance, we don't use both InnoDB and RocksDB. Yeah.
Okay. What's the dividing line for you? When would you choose to use Rocks versus InnoDB?
Yeah, right now the dividing line has been more like a key value store use cases. So those key
Okay.
value store use cases which have been using HBase and which might use HBase in the future, no, those are being put in MyRocks. Whereas the SQL use cases, they are continuing to go to MySQL. Yeah.
Okay. And are you also sharding MySQL?
Yes, like so
The
after
InnoDB side?
HBase was
Sorry. Yeah.
introduced. Yeah, go ahead.
The InnoDB side, I mean. So are you doing both Rocks and InnoDB sharding?
Our sharding logic, no, that part is kind of shared in the sense it's a similar logic, which is
Okay.
we yeah. So we based on the sharding key, we hash it, and that logic is sort of that's in the application, and it's kind of shared between MySQL and MyRocks. So yeah, so MySQL also we have sharded. So we did two kinds of sharding. One is like vertical sharding where we can keep different tables on different MySQL instances. And then more recently, we also built horizontal sharding where we could split one logical table into multiple physical tables. And these physical tables could be on the same or different MySQL machines. So yeah, and those are available to MyRocks as well. This again goes back to what I said earlier, that some of the tools and stuff that we have built for MySQL, they are sort of reusable for MyRocks. So whatever sharding we have built, we are sort of reusing that for MyRocks as well.
Okay. And so this migration, from HBase to the MyRocks setup, how hard was it? Was it something
Yeah,
that
I
was
think
fairly straightforward?
so. Well, I mean, it took some time, and so I mean, I had some previous migrations experience as well. So in that sense, at a high level, we were doing similar. We followed the standard approach of okay, you start double writing things to MyRocks and HBase, and then you do the backfilling to get the old data onto MyRocks, and then you do the reads, the dark reads, to compare if you are seeing similar results with between the HBase and the new MyRocks system. And once you see that okay, you are getting same results, if you feel confident, at that point you cut over to MyRocks, where the production starts reading from the MyRocks, but you again keep around the ability to go back if something bad were to happen. So in that sense, even after you have cut over to MyRocks, you continue to do double writing to HBase, and that way, yeah. So hopefully, yeah, if there is any issue, you can go back, and so things are hopefully fine. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so you did that approach where it was do everything in parallel. Once you validated, fail over, and leave it up and running for a while in case you fail back. Need to fail back. So you're now in production though with MyRocks, correct?
Yes.
So what kind of differences have you noticed? What I mean, I saw there were some pretty significant performance improvements, right?
Yes, like so. Yeah, we have been migrating table by table, and then we started choosing the higher QPS tables, because there was a long tail of low QPS tables. We did not want to worry about them at the beginning. So yeah, so the high QPS tables we started migrating, and so the main things that we saw are the P99 latency is a lot more stable. So with HBase, we would see that okay, the P99 latency, if you watch the graph, for a few hours, you often see it goes up to sometimes more than 1 second, 2 seconds. So yeah, so that the P99 latency has been much more stable with MyRocks. That's one thing that we have seen. The other thing is, yeah, we also saw the actual P99 latency number much lower. So we had like two kinds of use cases. One is where the bulk loaded tables, where the writes happen only through bulk loads, and then there were other tables where the writes were happening on a continuous basis regularly. So generally the bulk loaded tables, we saw even higher improvement. Sometimes maybe 10 times the P99 latency was better.
Wow.
Pardon? Yeah, the reason.
Oh, I said wow 10 times. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, 10 times.
Yeah. So I think the reason for that, one reason is that with MyRocks, the way we are handling these tables, we write to a different instance than we read from, so that when the bulk load is happening at high speed, the read performance hopefully is not affected by this bulk load. So yeah, that I think contributed to some of the higher performance.
And so one of the other things, and I don't know, that I know from a RocksDB perspective, it's fairly efficient on space. Did you happen to save more space, physical disk space, with this migration as well?
I think HBase is also good with compression. So,
Okay.
But anyway, that space was not the main thing that we were looking for. The space saving, yeah. So I would say maybe comparable space. The only thing is with HBase, it already keeps 3 copies of data, and on top of that, we needed slave cluster, like HBase slave cluster, where some tables had to be kept there for dumping to Hive and so on. So there, yeah, so that with MyRocks, we just keep 3 copies, that's it, like not 6 copies like HBase. Yeah. So, but then those
Okay.
6 copies were not being maintained for all tables. It was only for a few tables. Yeah.
Okay. And so it seems like there's been quite a bit of work here from a management perspective. I know that you mentioned using replication and some other things before, but for this use case, for your MyRocks deployments, you're not using standard replication. You're actually doing the sharding, and it sounds like you have the shard sets where you're loading data into individual shard sets and just replicating the data yourself with your data loads. Is that correct?
So that is only for tables which need bulk load. So the tables that
Okay.
need daily bulk load, they are being put in separate MyRocks machines. In those cases, we are not using replication. But for other tables, MyRocks tables which have direct writes, continual writes, they use the replication. Does that clarify?
Yeah. No, yeah. It was just interesting that reading how you were doing some of that. Basically going to shard set 1 and moving all the data to the other 2 shards and then loading that one and then moving flipping your traffic around. So it was a very interesting approach to doing those bulk loads, so you wouldn't have to incur the penalty of replication between the nodes. That was kind of interesting, and telling that you probably have quite large data loads that could potentially impact things. Now, you mentioned using time to live, and this is not something that's generally available in MySQL InnoDB, right? So, how is that used in the application? Maybe tell us a little bit about that, because that's a feature that's kind of unique in the MySQL ecosystem to MyRocks, correct?
Right. That's available in MyRocks, but not available in MySQL. So, yeah, I think that is mainly like if there is some generated data or something, we may choose to keep it around only for some limited time. After that, maybe the validity, uh, maybe it's no longer valuable, and so we just automatically drop it. So yeah, it's more for like data that's either generated or, I mean, certainly for user data like questions or answers, we don't want to have this time to live. It's yeah. Does that answer your
But if it
question?
was like metrics or cache or anything like that, session data for individual login sessions, you might have a time to live.
Yeah, or they might be offline jobs which are generating some data, and then maybe that data can be generated again. So yeah, maybe yeah, we might want to keep it only around for some number of days, and yeah.
Okay. And overall, you seem pretty happy with the results so far. I mean, so maybe tell us, this migration and getting things moved over. Was there anything that was really surprising? You've used MyRocks for a while now, so it might not be surprising this time. But as you started using MyRocks in the past, what are some of those features that you look at and say, like, that's really cool, or I really like that?
Yeah, I think certainly compared to InnoDB, the RocksDB has much better compression. So that certainly I like that. If the data set is large, certainly you want to have it compressed. Then yeah, some of these features like the time to live and so on, when the application needs it, that's good to have. So efficient way of purging old data. Then the other thing I also like is if you have tables where the write rate is high, So traditionally MySQL, the InnoDB was optimized for reads. So if you have like some workloads where the write rate is high, that's another thing
Mm-hmm.
area where MyRocks tends to perform better. So yeah, those are some of the things. Yeah, that I like about MyRocks.
Okay. And you did. I saw you filed a few bugs, so there were some things you wanted to work a little better. So hopefully, some of the folks out there, whether it's Vadim or Yoshinori, are going to watch this. And so, if there's a couple of those things that you want to mention, like, hey, it would be even better if, it kind of sounded like the Bloom filter was a pretty big deal for performance, and you might be able to squeak out a little bit more performance with that.
Prefix-based Bloom filter. Yeah, that was one of the things. Then RocksDB has a multi-get, but MyRocks is not using multi-get. That's what we were told. So since often we request a bunch of keys with key value store, no? So I think if MyRocks were to leverage the multi-get in RocksDB, that can give better performance. And then for InnoDB, this handler interface is supported. So if someone is doing simple requests, trying to get rid of all this SQL parsing overhead and stuff, we can use this handler interface and get better.
Oh, you're going really old with that, because they used to the handle interface used to be a big thing in InnoDB. I have not looked at that in years, but I remember when people would use that because there was a handler interface.
Yep, and something like that being made available for RocksDB would be even better, because I think a lot of key value store use cases might be using RocksDB storage engine. So there you may not need the overhead of all the SQL parsing and stuff. So it might be even more useful, like for RocksDB.
All right. Okay, and Vamsi, let me finish with this. Any advice to other people who are going to be looking at Rocks or looking at MyRocks? Anything that you learn, knowledge to pass along to them, that would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the standard things, in the sense you start off a little bit small, in the sense pick some table or some representative use case, and then experiment with that, and then have this do these shadow reads and validate what you are seeing, like both in terms of performance as well as in terms of correctness. Shadow reads is going to help you validate both those, and then and also it's very important to have the ability to go back, like when you are trying new systems. You want to also think about what happens if you switched over to the new system, and you are serving production traffic and something unexpected happens. Make sure that you can quickly switch back as well. So once you have some of these standard things, then hopefully you are in a good shape. Yeah. So
great. Well, Vamsi, thanks for stopping by and sharing your story around migrating to MyRocks, and some of the reasons why. If you want to follow along on some of the journey there, the Quora engineering blog has quite a few articles on the infrastructure, including how they do sharding and some of the benchmarks and some of the things that they ran into with this migration. But thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And as I mentioned, Quora, we have a lot of users, a lot of scalability challenges. There's a lot of opportunities, and we are hiring as well. So if anyone is interested,
there you go.
If anyone is interested,
absolutely.
Yeah, we have opportunities in many areas, like data, whether it's databases, caching, machine learning, product development, you name it. Like we have opportunities in all the areas. So thanks for inviting me.
Yep. Appreciate it. And if you are looking for something, want to do some big data challenges, definitely take a look at the Quora job boards there and see what's available. If you'd like to hear the rest of that interview, head on over to YouTube, or go ahead and pull out your phone, pull out your favorite podcast app. We are available everywhere. Just search for Percona's Hoss Talks Foss, and you can get this episode and a new episode every week where we talk about all the things happening in open source and keep you up to date.